So, hi everyone, and thanks for joining us. And welcome to RMIT Online's first virtual On the Couch. Before we start, I have some housekeeping and an explanation of how we plan to run this. Well, best made plans and all that. Today's discussion is going to be interactive, and we want to encourage audience participation throughout. And we'll do this in a couple of ways. We put out a call for questions as you signed up, and we'll be using those to steer the conversation. We'll also be taking questions throughout. Time permitting, we'll get to some of them. So please post them in the channel chat. I see some of you using the chat already, and make sure you make the post to everyone. There's a drop down there. There'll also be free polls during the session, and please jump in and get involved. Finally, microphones are on mute when you enter, and please make sure you keep your mics on mute throughout the session. It can be quite distracting, multiple voices. So let me introduce ourselves. Let us introduce ourselves even. I'm Bruce Taylor, and I work at RMIT Online as the Agile Delivery Manager, and I work on the Agile program here. I'm joined by our moderator and pollmeister, Jenny Graham, who works in our marketing team here at RMIT Online.
Hi, everyone.
Hi, Jen. And our very special guest today is Nigel Dalton, who should need no introduction. But for those who may have missed it, Nigel is a living treasure in Melbourne's Agile community. A career that has taken him from startups in San Francisco, and probably New Zealand as well, Nigel, to helping kick off Agile in Melbourne way back in the early noughties at Atlantic Planet. This is where I first met Nigel. We were working together. And right up to his current gig, which is as social scientist at ThoughtWorks. So welcome, Jen and Nigel.
Hey, what fun to be here. And I have to warn in advance that today is bigger than Christmas for me. Because today is the day that NBN comes to my house. So if there's a ring at the door at 1 o'clock, because they've given me a narrow window of between 1 and 5 to come and install the NBN. And
right.
I've used 30 gigabytes of mobile this month, because I have to do this on 4G. So I'm so excited, and Stan the cat can't open the door. So, you know, at 1 o'clock, if the bell rings, it's a miracle, and you guys talk among yourselves.
No worries. So before we get started, I'd like to do an acknowledgement of country. We'd like to acknowledge the people of the Woi Wurrung and Boon Wurrung language groups of the Eastern Kulin Nations, on whose unceded land we conduct the business of the university. I respectfully acknowledge their ancestors and elders past and present. I would also like to acknowledge the traditional custodians and the ancestors of the lands and waters across Australia where we conduct our business. Thank you. Whew. Okay.
I think, Bruce, I've said it a couple of times already, but incredibly appropriate that we do acknowledge country and the First Nation people, because I love the fact that Indigenous cultures often deal with a kind of a dream time, alternate reality, 100% integrated into their day. And, you know, we separate it. We have this kind of Western, this dreams, and then there's reality. And we made virtual reality as a thing in the middle, which we're struggling with. And
yeah,
I think First Nation people are really well positioned to deal with this crazy COVID, half online, half in the cloud, missing the in-person thing, and we can learn a lot.
Okay. I did have a starting question for you, Nigel. How's life going in lockdown for you?
Look, I'll acknowledge that I'm pretty lucky. I live in a beautiful place only a couple of kilometres from the city, hence we don't get the national broadband network. And lots of space, a house full, children, teenagers, family, etc., which is kind of nice. So people who are isolated, I think I'd struggle if I was on my own at the moment. Same. Feeling incredibly unproductive. That it's a really weird feeling, and I think the last 24 hours has really brought me to a real clarity around the ambiguity of this is killing me, Bruce. I don't know, how about you? It's not the, you know, we talk about VUCA theory, volatile, uncertain, complex, and ambiguous. It's the ambiguity that's getting me.
Totally. I was just trying to think the way that I personally measure productivity is kind of thrown over as well, especially in a role like mine where a lot of it is walking around and speaking to people and measuring the mood and trying to understand how to keep teams moving and optimize their processes, etc. Doing that did rely a lot on that face-to-face piece, and it's quite hard to get that gauge through screens. So yeah, I'm finding the ambiguity, or maybe it's the lack of context, the human context, one of the tough things for me.
And I think that's a really nice segue into our first poll, which is where I'm actually jumping off. So I'm about to launch the first poll, and we'd really love the audience, and we want to make this as interactive as possible. So the first question we have for you at home is, are you more or less productive in this new environment? So I'm going to launch that poll now, and I'll jump back on in about 10 minutes time to let you know the results before we start the next discussion.
Right, so you're going to use the cool polling function. Yeah, it'll pop up on screens, won't it?
Yeah, to pop up on screen.
Yes.
Awesome. That's a question I'm seriously interested in, obviously. So I've got a book underway called Super Productive, and measuring productivity is very, very challenging. As you say, Bruce, that whole face-to-face vibe thing. I tried to deliver a webinar this morning, and I was just really struggling with no response, facial response or emotional response.
Oh, you were with the last anywhere.
Yes, yeah, I did the last anywhere. But I mean, this is not a new challenge. The world of distance learning, RMIT online, this is what they do. So we're in a good place to learn a bit about that today. Yeah.
All right. So what I've done is we've grouped. So as I said earlier, we got questions from our audience, and sorry, I'm just getting some note that maybe some people can't see the polls.
I haven't got the poll yet either.
I don't think we see them as panelists.
It'll be coming through just in a moment. This is
okay.
Give Jen a second.
All right.
Give the Quizmaster a second.
Okay, Quizmaster's just having some TV troubles. There we go.
Oh,
I think we having more progress.
There's more than one quick poll. Am I having less meetings? Oh, yes, I am.
Oh, look at that. Speedy. That's fun. Anyway, what I was going to say was we've grouped the session into 3 sections and themes based on the questions we were asked, and the polls are related to them somewhat. And so we'll have a poll at the beginning of each section, and I've got some questions from the audience, Nigel, that I'm going to present to you.
Yeah, we've got sub-editor Adam telling us that it's fewer polls. The correct language is fewer polls, not less polls.
Oh my goodness.
Less polls.
Oh my goodness. Here we go. Grammatical corrections live. All right. So shall we hit the first question, Nigel? Are you ready?
Let's go. I'm ready.
All right. Question 1. So in this theme, I should tell you what the theme was in this one. Adjustments to working from home and keeping community and innovation alive. Right. Question 1. How prepared are organizations for work from home and transitioning to a completely digital work environment? And how has ThoughtWorks managed this?
Look, I reflect that there's a lot of incredibly optimistic people that working from home was going to be a miracle. We'd have quiet time, and it because in this internet connected world, there's lots of opinions expressed. So there's a community of people who are going, oh, this open plan office is bullshit, and it's just about capitalists saving money for office space, blah, 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 blah. We should all work from home or have offices. Well, that echo chamber gets amplified over and over. There's other people, who really struggle with the human connection, the extroverts of our world. This is not a great experience for them. And ultimately, ThoughtWorks is one of those people who brought into this situation a habit of working remotely, whether it was on client sites, from home, traveling, or otherwise. And you bring into this experience what you were before this experience. So no miracle has occurred. If you were rubbish at your team rituals, if your stand-ups were loud and argumentative and people talking all over each other, guess what? Your working from home remote life will be identical.
I think we were quite fortunate at RMIT Online that we had a relatively well-established working from home process going with teams. But I can imagine organizations where that wasn't the norm, and you hadn't thought of, and we'd already thought of working from home norms. So if you hadn't thought of those norms beforehand, rushing or being pushed straight into it would be tricky.
Yeah, and infrastructure too.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah.
I love some of the stories from Silicon Valley of people like Facebook working through a VPN back to their office, and food delivery services blocking their IP address because of the perceived denial of service attack as a result of all the traffic from all the people working from home.
I'm looking at the poll results, and it looks like more meetings rather than less meetings, which is interesting.
That's interesting.
So I'm on to my second question, and I'm just hurrying us through because we've got these sections strictly timed, and I can see the timekeeper is...
I'm wasting all the time talking.
No, this is exactly what we're you for. Question 2 in this section: do you recommend working the same routines in your new landscape, i.e. 9 to 5, coffee and lunch breaks, or do we need to look at, or should we examine different ways of doing it?
The opportunity is there to examine a different routine, definitely. People have different schedules. Teenagers don't get up till 11 that's an early start. So why would you start school at 9? New Zealand did a good experiment around that, letting the older students start at a later time. Seemed to be pretty productive for them in terms of their exam results. I think everyone's going to have their own habits, and you do have to acknowledge that where there's the team will have a culture of how it gets together. So is everyone online by 9 o'clock for a stand-up, or 9:30? Those habits are still useful. The hardest part for me is sustaining work sitting in one place. I'd forgotten, a bit like you, how much I get up and walk around in my day job.
Yeah.
And I really had my first experiment of this back in New Zealand before Christmas, starting my book, where I thought, I'm just going to sit here and I'm going to write for hours and hours. And I was insane after 90 minutes going, it hurts to write another word. And so I think some new habits required of maybe Pomodoro techniques, if people know what that is. That's just Pomodoro, because it's like a kitchen timer shaped like a tomato.
Yeah.
20-minute burst followed by 5-minute break, 20-minute burst, 10-minute break, connect with your friends. And, you can work on whatever bursts you like. It doesn't have to be 20, but 30 possibly. Do not try and just sit there and do work.
I've found myself breaking up my day and I said earlier that my family are out doing projects in the garden. I found myself breaking up my day, starting a bit earlier, having an hour or two in the middle doing projects in the house as well, which has been one of the great advantages of working from home. And then maybe ending the day a bit later and having more longer breaks in the day, as long as it aligns with other people's needs to contact you.
Yeah, I think, I see a question there from Helen going, well, what are you checking if you're not doing Zoom? I honestly think the text messaging and Slack messaging, those kind of things, are more powerful than we imagine. And in some ways, I was reading this report by a psychologist talking about the weird disconnection, the cognitive dissonance that this experience, you and I seeing each other, which you think this should feel intimate and easy, but in fact you're inaccessible. Our reaction is a bit like a dog or a cat looking at you as its owner on the screen. It's quite stressful for them because you're there, but you're not there. Our brains in Zoom spend their life reconciling that. It's not really, Bruce. In a text messaging conversation, in fact, a telephone call is possibly more intimate than a Zoom, because you're not trying to reconcile the visual signal. You know the rules of the phone call or a text message or otherwise. Texts are great because it's asynchronous and you can kind of take a minute to think about it. Different people, different ways, but yeah, a quick text message check-in, I would say, is the lowest common denominator.
All right, so just hurrying us along, I'm getting the nudge. BAU is one thing. This is the next question. Sorry, Nigel. BAU is one thing, but what about keeping innovation, momentum, and creativity alive when you are all remote? Any tips?
Well, if you were good at that before, you'll be good at it now. If you were not good at it before, again, you're probably not going to be great at it now. So having a think about how you create that, and it could be as simple as using maybe your team should have a little human-centered design thrash mini hackathon at 1 o'clock over a coffee or something. Okay, what's a problem? And practice some of your human-centered design skills that you've learned. I think there's some tools in our toolkit, whether you call it lean or agile or modern ways of working, that can be adapted and innovated as well. took the whole double diamond human-centered design thing to some friends recently, the Orange Sky Laundry team, and just showed them this is a way of thinking. You really think and get in touch with the problem before you start building solutions. And I'm super impressed with how many different ways they found to use that method in very short periods of time, you know, in a quick half-hour brainstorm, as well as longer periods. So look in the toolkit, but you know, it's hard to be creative if you're feeling really stressed. And you're feeling...
And I think this is I think one of the things that some people might be forgetting about is the fact that the reason why we're all working from home, and that there is in the background this looming, it's an existential threat in a way. So how do you keep that momentum and that positivity?
Look, this wasn't a planned thing. This, as I describe it, it's the greatest unsupervised workplace sociology experiment in history. It's a giant simulation where the virus is the only control variable. And so don't expect us to have become really good at this over time. You know, learning remotely is one thing. You're in the mindset to do it, working remotely. This is the training exercise.
Indeed. I was actually thinking to myself, how would I run things like, in my role, things like hackathons remotely? And I've been toying with that idea. I think that could be a fun challenge, actually. But I think one thing I would suggest is don't force these things, but also don't forget those great things you were doing as an organization. And it might not be as good as it was in the office, and maybe it's better, but don't just drop them because the situation you find yourself in.
Yeah, look, working in the lean community, I get to work, particularly the hospital lean community, are an amazing group of people who've adopted this way of thinking. And I think, you know, this whole thing is driven by an inattention to some key principles of lean in the hospital things. That's our core problem, is we don't have surplus or slack capacity in our medical system. So we've adjusted our entire lives around not overloading hospitals, which is the right thing to do. If they get into a difficult situation, they go into shorter periods of management. So they'll go to half-day huddles, they call them. I don't call them stand-ups. And visualize, prioritize, do all the things. And I get inspiration from how they use. So that the key concept is daily management. So shorten the cycle, make the blocks work smaller.
Cool. Now, we're running out of time on this one. I'm just going to throw to Jen in case there's any questions that have come through in the chat, because I believe Jen's monitoring it. Anything that you want to bring up from the chat, Jen? And you're on mute.
On mute, not on what?
Not anymore.
I'll share the results now from our first poll. So very much we're finding that people have more meetings than less meetings. So 68%, I think, had said that. So we had Nuala from the audience who actually raised a really good question saying, are more meetings actually considered productive, or is that really less productive? So
good question.
Yeah, so I might throw that across to you, Nigel, but while I do, we'll also launch our second poll, which is whether or not you feel more or less productive in this new environment. So that will be coming through now.
Okay. There's a couple of interesting comments here about, the kind of the rapid news cycle being this contextual. I mean, I feel a constant need to check the news, a constant need to check the numbers, even though the numbers are just, they're not data. We're just like so hard to try and predict the future out of whatever statistics we have today around infections, deaths, all those kind of things. Not reliable data. It's better just to sort of chill out and dance with the system.
All right, so theme 2, agile practices outside the traditional home of software. I love that agile can be called traditional, funnily enough, but I guess it's been around long enough that it can. Agile outside the traditional home of software. Are there organizations or sectors agile doesn't apply? Could government run, for example, on agile practices?
Yeah, well, of course,
I struggle a little bit with the word agile being an all descriptor, but
let's use it with an A and a generic descriptor in this case, because I mean, you and I started quite strict agile thinking back in 2007. It was just trying to make better software, and and we were in a bit of a pickle around money and needing to change course for an organization. So that was agile. We were making software. That was quite clear. Now we've got organizations that are seeking agility and more flexibility and more adaptation. It's much more of what I would describe as lean. So I think those principles, the lean management is it's a thing. It's 50 years old. It contains all the other parts of the set that Agile never brought to the table. And people like you and I invented. We should have just read the lean books. They'd already written about it. But, we did our best to invent that Lonely Planet, and I went on to do the same in other places. So visualization is always a useful tool. Visualization is a great homework tool. Visualization is a great work, a factory tool, a shop tool. It's a kitchen tool. Let's visualize when you've used something up in the fridge. Let's put a Kanban card on the front that the milk's about to run out, which saves that nasty surprise for Dad the next morning when there's no milk for the flat white. And so, the fundamentals of value, flow, and waste, that's the lean fundamentals. Are you doing the high value things? Is the work flowing? And are you getting rid of waste every day? They flow into daily rhythms that, we used at REA Group, and visualize the work, prioritize the work. Somebody owns the work, so someone's actually going to get the milk. And talk every day, talk in shorter cycles. And I saw that visualization get a relatively disorganized young man through his high school years in my household. And he's real good at it now, like breaking down his work, visualizing, and he's way better organized than I am now.
So I have my first child into high school, and she has not yet started post-it noting on walls. Are you suggesting that would be a good thing to encourage?
Yeah, very much so. And particularly, so I sit around assignments, and because there's components and you feel good about. So my definition of productivity.
Sense of completion, or that sense of achieving something.
A sense of productivity. So let's imagine productivity is defined as measurable progress towards meaningful goals. So in a team, if you're a team lead, your number one job is to provide that North Star of a meaningful goal for you and your colleagues. And if in your family situation, it'd be great to do this essay. Measurable progress, well, that's visualized because cards, like, okay, I wrote the intro done. I got my references, I've got some diagrams done. It's a really healthy way of working that's quite humane in that sense.
I'm looking at the poll in progress, and I'm loving this poll feature. Never seen it before. Are you more or less productive working from home, and the less being not almost half and half? And I'm wondering if there's a lesson in measurable progress being small chunks that we can take for working from home. When you don't always have that connection with your colleagues, you can at least get that sense of progress by breaking things down into small achievable pieces. Yeah. I like that idea.
Look, the interesting thing, Bruce, and at the moment, I think one of the real downsides of this COVID lock-in is mental health.
Yeah.
Measurable progress towards meaningful goals is also a definition of happiness. So human happiness, that thing is very difficult to pin down. It's not about how much money you have or how smiley your face is. Drugs can fix that. So, but no, it's absolutely attributable to being progress towards goals that are meaningful to you. So I like that overlap between feeling productive and, the fundamentals of being happy. And, you take, and why I do have faith in the future is teenagers, Fortnite players, the kids, they're just incredible. They absolutely understand about measurable progress towards meaningful goals in a game. And I just do need to introduce my co-star here. This is Stanley.
Hello, Stanley.
He's a bit of a rock star on the Zoom, so he'll sit in for a second, and then he is in charge, so he'll go whenever he wants to. Yeah. And you've completely lost my point, mate. Where was
That's okay. I'll jump to the next question.
Next question.
That was a good segue for me, because I was going, okay, how are we going to get to the next question?
Stanley sorted it for us. Stanley sorted it.
All right, Stanley. So Stanley, you can answer if you wish. Question 2, what practices from Agile could other organizations learn from that would help with remote and distributed teams in this current situation? Or if they were to go fully remote, I guess.
Yeah. I think So the fundamentals of lean involve a thing called plan, do, check, act, or plan, do, study, act, a cycle. Some organizations take a very long time to come back to do the study. So they'll plan it. Yep, that's great. And waterfall works. If you've got something that's not changing or moving or involves customers, waterfall works fine. So you plan it, you do it, you study it for changes, and then you do your very small modifications. Or if you're doing something in software or digital or with customers, do those plan, do, study, act really short. So plan and do and study and change your course on much smaller chunks. And I think that is, in times of uncertainty, a really sensible, generalizable principle to doing all sorts of things. Check in that everyone's on the same page. So that's really what leaders can do, is just that human check-in, how you're going. And then
I'd say what I was thinking about this question, actually, and I thought, why is it that I feel, to a large extent, we at RMIT Online have been quite successful in having to adapt ourselves quite quickly to this working from home world. And one of the things we've been steering ourselves towards for the last couple of years is really cascading down and up goals and making goals really transparent throughout the organization. We use a framework called OKRs, which are objectives and key results. See you, Stanley. But also making sure that teams have that autonomy to make the decisions and really setting those goals, but allowing the teams to figure out how they get to those goals. And that has been a really beneficial thing, because I think for a lot of our members of our teams, they know why they come to work every day and what the goal is. And ideally, and we still, obviously there's always work to do, but we try to give autonomy to our teams to get there. And I think that's one of the things that we strove to do when we started at Lonely Planet, be really strong with the team on ownership.
Yeah. OKRs have been a bit of a disaster they're so easily micromanaged, which takes completely away from it. Or and I think Marty Kagan's column recently on svpg.com, or I think it's .com, Marty Kagan, the writer about product and product design, going, you know what, I'm done with it. It's really just quite a simple thing. It's about focus and alignment.
Yeah.
Whatever you can use, and you can use OKRs for sure. You can use conversation, you can use cards, you can use an Obeya room, you can just have a charismatic leader who's great at explaining why you're doing this. But alignment and focus, really, really key.
So we use OKRs at RMIT Online, not in a strict way. We definitely use it for promoting conversations and creating alignment. So I think that's a good point. You can use them for top-down management. Like
anything
something to be
misused. This whole opportunity to work from home could be misused. But the organisations that are knowingly checking in, and you must leave your camera on, so you're at your desk the whole time. And it's like, oh my God! So the problems you had before are the problems you have today. Some of them amplified in this weird, unsupervised workplace sociology experiment.
I'm going to have to throw over to Jen, because we're ready for the next poll, and also the results of the last one.
Quizmaster Jen, what's our poll?
So in terms of are we more or less productive, it was almost an equal 50-50 split. There were a few really interesting comments that some people have actually struggled in terms of the tech that they have at home, and whether that has hindered them from being productive. And also some comments that generally a work from home day was great for productivity, but when it's 100% virtual, it's a different story. I think that's something we'll definitely start to see over the coming months, if we do remain in this situation, how productivity, how you kind of keep it if this is going for a number of months. So trying to keep it positive, the third poll we want to throw out to the audience is, what are you most looking forward to about returning to returning to work in an office? And we've got a couple of options there. If you find that what you're most looking forward to isn't in the poll, feel free to put it in the chat, and we'll come back and report on it shortly.
Cool.
Should we answer that question, Bruce?
Which one?
What are you looking forward to? I mean,
Yes.
you're in beautiful rural Wood End. You'd never want to go back to the city.
To be honest, I'm an extrovert, so I get my energy from people, and so I'm really missing those face-to-face conversations and hugs and sitting outside with friends drinking a beer in the sun.
Yeah, I agree. So I had the privilege of seeing an amazing talk at a ThoughtWorks conference last year, and this lady was talking about the psychology of work and collaboration in particular. She said, well, look, we did a good thing when we ensured diversity in teams and started to work on that, and then a better thing when we started ensuring inclusion for all the voices in our diverse teams. But the thing that really counts is a layer on the top of those two, and that really correlates to productivity and team performance, and that's belonging. And that's what I feel has been dialed back for me as I go into the ThoughtWorks office, and there's just a lovely sense of belonging that's really hard to define. It's amongst the faces and the people and the teams and where we sit, and we've got diversity and inclusion, those kind of things, and it's harder to feel like I belong.
I like the when we have ceremonies like showcases and stand-arounds, and the whole office or large majority of offices in one room sharing what they've been working on, and the excitement people get from that is something that I'm going to...
The poll's up, Bruce.
The poll's up. Okay, so...
technology would be good too, although in about, it's 1 o'clock. Where's my NBN?
Exactly. Let's get through before the knock on the door.
Yeah.
So this is our final section. After things get back to normal, whatever normal is now, question 1, what does enterprise thinking look like post-corona, and what would we stop, start, and continue? What will we have learned? And in this case, I hope you have your crystal ball polished and ready, Nigel.
Look, I think everyone's North Star during this time should be to learn something. It's not something you spend enough time doing at work. Like it's frustrated me for years. I mean, I'm lucky. I like to read, and so I love books, and that gives me a natural kind of a river of information that I can sort and learn and connect and those kind of things, and just get in the habit of learning, because learning hurts. Like, this is what people forget. You get practiced at it. So I get practice at sitting and reading and those kind of things. But I also, if we all look down here, you will see the music end of the studio. So I've been learning the guitar for about 10 years, and it's given me an incredible appreciation of how painful, not just on the fingers, but in the connecting in the brain is. So the more you do it, that's the thing. The more you do it, the more you actually get good at it. And I'd love to see space and time put aside in work times for quiet time, reading time, reflection time. I'd like to see that in people's Outlook schedules and less meetings.
I like that idea. I do a lot of drawing, and I dabble in painting. I'm okay at it.
You do? I'm disappointed we're not seeing one of your big ones in the background of your shop there, mate. That was lovely the other day.
I had to move to a better lit room. I could take people on a tour, but I don't know how the internet will cope moving around the house. I've had to bind to the phone because the NBN isn't very good. So don't get your hopes up. No,
my hopes are up. What are you going to learn in this break?
I actually think a lot of what I'm doing in the interim is projects around the house. So handyman skills, attempting to drill a hole that doesn't go on wonky angles.
Yeah. Those are good skills. Those are good life skills. I'm attempting to learn some software called Hindenburg.
Right.
It's podcasting software that helps compensate for, it's like some radio journalists have made it. It's beautiful, but oh my goodness, it's doing my head in trying to make it all work with Skype, because I want to record podcasts with remote. God, if anyone's an expert on that, I'd love to hear from them. I want to learn Simon Wardley's strategic mapping tool, which I've had 5 goes at and never actually had the time to sit down and do it. And
is that's not Cynefin? No.
Cynefins they're mates. So right. David Snowden and Simon Wardley are mates, but Kineffin's another great framework for people to learn. Tons online about that. And I'm rereading an old book called Out of the Crisis, which is a Toyota book about how they dealt with that terrible time when all the cars were recalled. They went from something like, 3,000 or 4,000 phone calls a day in their call center to 90,000. And how they used their culture and their habits to adjust the organization to crazy, crazy times.
All right. I have one last question before we'll throw back to Jen. And it's an interesting one that I've been thinking about as well is, what do you think transition back to working in offices will be like? What do you think the challenges will be? For me, I've got a couple. One is the commute, as we've alluded to. It takes me currently about an hour and a half each way. I do use that time to read and do some work, but sitting on a train for an hour and a half, it can be hard work. And the other one would be remembering to put pants on in the morning.
Yeah, tracky dacks, huh? Tracky dacks the answer.
Yeah.
I dressed up today. I just ironed a shirt and put my nice
good.
jacket on just to get kind of in the mindset of it. I'm really looking forward to going back to work. I think what's going to happen, here's my crystal ball gaze, is that we're now going to have a healthy mix of acceptance that people can work from home and work more flexibly. I don't think it's going to be a revolution, because I look at what's happening in Singapore and China as our teams go back to work there for ThoughtWorks. Pretty quick reversal back to some norms. Our norms include remote work though, so we're very lucky. I dearly hope that flexibility works in productivity terms. I think it's going to save a lot of money, and it's going to stop the mad rush to cities that Australia and New Zealand are suffering. New Zealand's got Auckland's turning into a really massive, giant urban district where people commute an hour and a half a day to talk to each other on Slack.
Yeah. And we do have to acknowledge that there are a lot of people who have been far less lucky than we have to continue working at this time.
Oh, so many. I like to watch all my friends and young friends in the hospitality industry and the events industry. All the children in this household have lost their part-time jobs, and that's a small thing. But friends with small businesses who are just in the ambiguity of this moment is.
I think the reality of it will hit us as we wander the streets of Melbourne at our lunchtimes when we're back in the office. I can imagine there will be a lot of vacant places. Who knows? And that reality will hit us.
Sure.
Yeah. Okay. That was the last of our scripted questions. So throwing over to Jen for the final poll, and whether there's any other questions on the chat that we could answer.
Yeah, so that was I guess from the poll, pretty overwhelmingly, we saw socializing and collaboration were the two things that came up. Tech was the lowest missed thing for when we returned to the office. We did have an interesting comment, Adriana, who commented in the chat. She's an introvert, but she's really happy to be at home right now, but she does really miss the morning commute on the ferries, which is something I think so many of us aren't missing, is the commute. But I think there were lots of chats, lots of comments as well, that of course we're very lucky to be working from home.
Yeah.
People who have been spending more time in the garden with their kids, with their pets. So some really positive comments around that as well. And so I guess I just wanted to thank you both so much for your time. Nigel, we always love hearing from you. And for those of you who haven't already heard, we actually did a podcast with Nigel called The Pickle. It can be downloaded where all good podcasts live. So if you're interested in finding out more about Agile and ways of working, that's a good one to check out. And thank you, Bruce, as well. You've done a ripper job hosting this. This is actually our first online event. So like so many of you, we're learning ourselves about how to navigate this new norm. And so we will be sending a survey out following this to find out a bit more feedback from you around what you would like to see in the future. So please be as honest and as open as possible. We want to make sure these are valuable to you.
Jen, there's one really important bit of information I need out of the questions that the chat's just flowing by at this speed. is Karina, you put up that you are the owner of a cidery and distillery. I'd like to know the name, please, because I think you have a little bit of cider and a little bit of distilled items. So pop that in the chat for us, and
that would be fantastic.
Buy something online, and hopefully it's in Wood End, Bruce, and I'll come up. We'll go.
Oh,
when
indeed.
it's all done, we'll go mountain biking and we'll get drunk.
We could also, after, maybe in that order might be the wise one.
Yeah.
We could always go to the Harcourt, where there are also cideries and a fantastic mountain bike track.
They're in Tassie.
I would love
Tassie. Oh, that's cool. Well, we need to go to Tasmania to go mountain biking.
Well, that is also true.
Yes. Hell's Gate Gin and Brick Road Cider.
Perfect. You've written that one
So
down.
I think before we finish off, I just wanted to ask you both if you could give us one quick tip for staying sane at home, and also to let us know a good book that we should be reading.
Oh my God, one book.
Just one.
Oh.
Okay, there's actually a great book, and I can't remember who wrote it, but I read it years ago. It was about the WordPress company culture who were fully remote, and it was called My Year Without Pants.
So that's the Automatic people.
Is it Automatic, is it?
Yeah.
I read it.
And look, an interesting contrast to
Lonely Planet.
Yeah, there's a really nice column written by someone who worked there.
Right.
And it's always good to see both sides of the story, because they talked about the mental stress of working completely remotely and then trying to schedule their once a year catch up, which was in school holidays. And what I think to reflect on is that there's no magic solution. There's a continuum. And we each got to find our continuum for our organizations and where we're happy in amongst all that. And someone said, I think it's Scott Birkin is the author, which I sound smart, but it just came up in the chat.
Oh, good. So we both got it wrong. That's great.
I don't know. I don't have one book, Jen. I've got a book list of all the books. Can I just put together a version of that, and can you share it with the crew online?
Absolutely. Yep.
I'd love to see that too. That'd be great.
Yes.
That would be cool.
We'll
and I think and my one tip would be make lists. You know, it's like we're biologically wired to feel safe and comfortable in our brains when we go to the top of the hill, surrounded by the savannah, and we can see the lions and the tigers and the wildebeest and everything, and we can light a little fire and feel comfortable on the top of the hill and observe what's coming for us. That making a list in your book, which is, I do it so often. So I have my list right here of the things I'm attempting to achieve. Here's my list. There's big things, little things, and little lights, little ticks.
Mine.
And that's my measurable progress towards meaningful goals.
Fantastic.
Excellent. Thank you so much for joining us, and we'll be in touch about the next series of events as we map them out. Thanks, everyone.
Well done, Jen. See you, Bruce.